Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, July the 19th, 2023. A few weeks ago, I made a video about this month, and in this video, I very much highlighted the Mars-Saturn opposition, which takes place tomorrow. I believe this is the main event of the month. So today I want to really look at the Mars-Saturn opposition, particularly in terms of people who have it in their horoscopes or had it in their horoscopes if they happen to be dead. I think there is always a danger with astrology, in my experience, that when you get really excited about an astrological event, you're talking about it and you're really looking forward to it, or maybe you're dreading it, when you really highlight it and you're thinking about it, it often becomes a damp squib. So perhaps by talking about the Mars-Saturn opposition tomorrow, I'm disempowering it. Can I really disempower a Mars-Saturn opposition? No, I can't, but I'm just deluding myself there. I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it before it happens. I think we've already seen its impact. With the recent bombing of the bridge in Crimea, that happened very close to a Mars-Saturn opposition, and it was hitting the MC-IC axis. I will be going back to that chart. I did talk about it yesterday, but yesterday I didn't really have a precise time when it happened. I think now we have a clearer idea about the precise time, so I will be looking at that again. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology for today, which is Wednesday, July the 19th, 2023. So here we go. If you're wondering why Piers Morgan is up here, that's because Piers Morgan has got a Mars-Saturn opposition in his chart. You can see he's very much alive. Doesn't seem to have bothered him, but I'll be suggesting ways in which that Mars-Saturn opposition might have worked in his horoscope. So as far as today is concerned, we see that the moon is still in Leo, but now it's moving towards an opposition with Uranus. So you can see it's conjunct Mercury still. So there's still a lot of communication here. Moon-Mercury conjunction is about people talking. But as I said yesterday, Leo is not the greatest sign for Moon and Mercury because it's kind of too stuck in its ways. It's a fixed sign. It's a little too into itself and its ego. For Mercury to function properly, it needs some air. It needs to be able to breathe. It needs to be able to move. And Mercury and Leo can get really fixated on particular ideas, particular ways of being, can get fixated on its ego, and so that can be a problem. But Moon and Mercury are the communication planets. Moon, emotional communication, Mercury, more intellectual communication. So that's still very much there. With the Moon now moving towards a square of Uranus, that does create a certain amount of instability. Uranus is the planet of explosions, earthquakes, and also just plain stubbornness. Yeah, you don't normally associate Uranus with being stubborn, but when it's in Taurus, it can be about having ideas, perhaps revolutionary ideas, but not really prepared to compromise them. So as we go about our life today, we may notice some very stubborn people who are maybe angry and stubborn, and if you try to challenge their stubbornness, challenge their ideas, they might explode. So be careful there. So that's one thing to note. Another thing to note is that Mars there's Mars at 537 Virgo, and there's Pluto. Now, Mars and Pluto might not look like it, but Mars and Pluto are making an aspect. They're making a biquintile. So what is a biquintile? A biquintile represents two lots of 72 degrees. So a biquintile is an 144 degree aspect. Now you might wonder why 144? Because 72 degrees is 1/5 of the circle. So if you have a birthday cake, you cut exactly 1/5. That will be 72 degrees. If you have a birthday cake with 5 slices, all equally cut, and you take 2 slices away, that would be 144 degrees. So quintiles, biquintiles are about style. They're about the number 5. They're about what we try to create. Yeah, and they can be really quite contrived. So if Mars is biquintile Pluto, it can be about people trying to create a sort of heavy, intense style. They're trying to assert themselves in a very heavy way. Perhaps people exaggerating their own power. It may be connected also with dress. I'm not quite sure how you would dress in a Mars-Pluto kind of way, but people perhaps dressing with attitude, trying to dress in a way that shows how powerful they are. Though I'm perhaps being too negative. There's nothing wrong with style. There's nothing wrong with trying to create an image, provided you don't get yourself into trouble. So maybe you want to try adopting a Mars-Pluto style. See what happens. Really show your power, your emotional power in the way you present yourself to the world. It probably means not talking too much. I suppose Mars-Pluto, if it talks too much, it kind of loses its power. So maybe bear that in mind. Now, there is a rather nice midpoint configuration. Cupido, the hypothetical planet connected with love, unions, marriages, is opposition the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. I think that's great from a relationship point of view. If you want to maybe create some kind of union with someone else, doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. It can be partnership, friendship, whatever, coming together. Two people coming together for whatever reason. It might actually work quite well with Cupido on the Venus Jupiter midpoint. But it's important to be optimistic, to think that the best that can happen, and not get involved in negative thinking. Certainly with that moon square Uranus and conjunct Mercury, don't get involved in arguments. If it feels natural, then I suppose go for it. Now, as far as my forecast for the 12 signs for today, here goes. So these are my forecasts for Wednesday, July the 19th, 2023. Aries, you want to show the world that you are not someone to be messed around with, and you'll be tempted to show off your power. I'm saying all this, by the way, because Mars biquintile Pluto. However, displays of strength aren't always appropriate. You have to look at the situation. In this light, power struggles can appear out of nowhere, even when you're out enjoying yourself. Taurus, you're trying to create a nice, secure environment, but it's hard work. Things suddenly destabilize and you might have to start all over again. So consider the impact you're having and perhaps curb some of your excesses. Yet it is possible that the old ways of doing things need to be shaken up. Gemini, you've got things to say which might have a powerful impact on other people. Indeed, a disruptive impact. Maybe this can't be helped, or maybe you need to apply some self-discipline. If you're driving or travelling short distances, be extra careful. Things could get chaotic very quickly. Cancer. You've got careful plans which you want to put into action, and perhaps there's a financial dimension. Yet you can't take anything for granted. There could be unexpected setbacks, and it may be necessary to go back to the drawing board. Friends have surprising ideas. Leo, you know where you are going and you can project yourself very well, but you must have some flexibility and your ego may have to handle a few knocks. For example, it is not a disaster if you find that you're wrong. By admitting your mistake at an early stage, you'll be able to correct the problem. Virgo, you're starting to feel tense. Mars is applying to an opposition of Saturn. It's a time to be honest about your feelings and to not let anger and frustration spoil the show. Yet, there are ways of kidding the opposition into thinking that you're stronger than you are. Or maybe you should just keep a low profile. Libra, you want to float from place to place, person to person, without getting too deeply involved. Typical Libra. However, it is not a time for frivolities. Things are more serious than they seem, and a superficial approach is unlikely to win you friends. Yet, people playing power games are actually paper tigers. Scorpio, you're ambitious and you expect to be taken seriously. Yet, the moon aspects Uranus, and as a result, you could be let down. People say one thing and do something else. Plus, there is no accounting for the quirks of human nature. So try to be self-sufficient and don't let unwanted elements spoil the party. Sagittarius, progress happens in 2 steps. Before you can make the big move, there's something that needs to be sorted out. It's tedious, but once you've got the boring stuff out of the way, you can make fast progress. In order to experience expanding horizons, you need to see the world with a new set of eyes. Capricorn, things are difficult to work out, and you're aware that few things in life have a single cause. The surface appearance tells you one thing, but it is only half the story. But it's not a problem, provided you can function in a complicated atmosphere, which I think you can. Something is coming your way which you might want to avoid. Aquarius, it's important that you don't feel singled out. It is not one of the better days, regardless of your star sign. And if you talk to people and listen carefully to what they've got to say, you'll start to understand the overall picture. In relationships, partners are looking for reassurance, and you might have to go the extra mile to provide it. Pisces, it may feel that you're sailing on the edge of a storm and you're wondering whether to keep going or to turn back. However, it's a situation where subjective impressions are important. You could exaggerate or understate what's going on, and that will have an impact on the outcome. Nonetheless, preparation is everything. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to turn to the I Ching. As always, I threw 3 coins in the air. The I Ching. I threw 3 coins in the air and I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So I got a single hexagram. It did not move. And this hexagram was inner truth. We've had this quite recently. So inner truth is about actually seeing what really is going on, or perhaps asking questions until we actually find out what's going on. So we know when dealing with other people, when we can't really work out what motivates them, we need to really ask questions, maybe look into their soul and find out what really does make them tick. Because I think we can find the answer. Of course, really that applies to ourselves too. What makes us tick? That's something we've got to ask. But this inner truth, it doesn't move. It's locked, and that can be a problem that it doesn't move. And I think this, underlines the fact that just because you know the truth doesn't mean that you progress. You can know the truth about something, and just do nothing. It's like when you go to therapy. If you go to therapy, if you spend a couple of years in therapy, you analyze yourself with your help of your therapist, and you get to the bottom of it, and you find out all about your childhood traumas and all of this, and you know it all. It doesn't change a thing. You still do what you do. I mean, it doesn't actually change your behavior. And that's perhaps, like inner truth, locked, not going anywhere. Yes, truth on its own is meaningless. It's useless. You actually have to be able to act on the truth. And I think there's a danger today that we see the truth, whether it's about ourselves or the people around us, but we do nothing, and it doesn't help us at all. So I'm going to go back to the astrology now, and I am going to look at some charts, and I am focusing on the Mars-Saturn opposition, which is tomorrow. To give you here is actually the chart for tomorrow. I set it for London, 9:39 p.m. You can see Mars is at 6:21 Virgo, Saturn is at 6:21 Pisces. So this is what is about to happen, and we're really starting to feel it. This opposition is made more intense by the fact that the moon has just gone into Virgo. So in fact, the Mars-Saturn opposition is not going to be is unlikely to be at maximum power at 9:39. It'll be at maximum power when the moon makes a conjunction to Mars in the opposition to Saturn. So Mars-Saturn opposition, it can be about death. Traditionally, Mars-Saturn are the death pair. Can be about frustration. What do we do with this anger that we feel? How do we get it out into the open? And it can be connected with cruelty. Now, I want to go back to the chart for the explosion on the Crimea Bridge. Now, there are actually two explosions. This was on the 17th. There was it looks like some naval drone hit the bridge and caused some damage. Apparently, it's not going to be fixed may not be fixed until September. The Russians are saying that the British were somehow involved in it. Maybe it was British technology, whatever. But let's just look at that first explosion. The first explosion was at 3:04 a.m. Apparently, sort of looked at what Wikipedia said, and they got, I think, a Russian source saying it happened at 3:04 a.m. And so, in terms of that chart, why did it happen when it happened then? Okay, I don't know. It's a new moon. Very often military operations happen on a new moon. That's because it's dark. So you would have thought with infrared and all that kind of stuff, the new moon would have lost its power. But maybe it helped. I don't know how it works, but it just certainly happened on a new moon. And notice that it happened 3:04. If we take 3:04, this was the moment when the midheaven moved from Aquarius to Pisces, and you can see that Saturn is conjunct the midheaven there, and so that conjunction would have been all the more poignant when the midheaven was also in Pisces, and so that kind of fits. The death, I think a Russian couple who were holidaying with their daughter were on the bridge and they were both killed and their daughter was orphaned. So there was certainly death when this happened. So that sort of fits. From a perspective of a Ukrainian who was planning this thing, would this have been a good time to do this from an astrological point of view? I suppose you could argue maybe it was, because imagine you've got a venture. It doesn't matter what the venture, but okay, it does matter what the venture is. But if you've got a venture, you're planning on doing something. I suppose you could say, well, you want the moon in a good position. Moon is a new moon, but the moon is in Cancer, which is in its own sign. It's also, Cancer is the exaltation of Jupiter. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, and Jupiter is in Taurus, the exaltation of the moon. So there was a moon-Jupiter mutual reception by exaltation when this happened. So maybe from a perspective of a person organizing this attack, that would have been fortunate. And because you were presumably planning on killing people or causing a lot of damage, it would also make sense to have Mars-Saturn in a prominent position. Now, of course, I'm sure they weren't consulting astrologers on this, but having Saturn and Mars on the midheaven like this was probably made a lot of sense, because it kind of fits what happened. And also, as I said yesterday, Neptune was square the ascendant. Neptune is a planet of water, of sea, oceans, and it's square the ascendant. So that kind of fits the event, a sort of a maritime event causing undermining of things. Yes, I know it was an explosion, but so that kind of makes sense. Now, the second explosion, I don't think from an astrological point of view, the second explosion is going to be as important as the first one, because the first explosion is like the beginning of the attack. But for what it's worth, here is the second explosion, which I think happened at 3:20 a.m. But still, that Mars-Saturn does fit really well, because you've now got Mars and Saturn that much closer to the midheaven. Mars is almost exactly on the IC. Saturn is very close to the midheaven, so that fits. So as far as other people with Mars-Saturn oppositions are concerned, so here is someone, his name is Taras Bobanich. Now, he was a Ukrainian commander of, I believe, the right sector. And on the beginning of April 2022, he was killed near Izium. And so from a Ukrainian perspective, he's a hero. From a Russian perspective, he's definitely not a hero. A lot of Russian news reports were, talking about what he'd done and all this kind of stuff, but I'm not going to go into them. I'm just looking at, this is a chart of someone who was killed at the beginning of April near Izium, or around in Izium, and you can see that this person has Mars-Saturn opposition. Now, you could say that lots of people were killed in the beginning of April 2022, and some of them almost by chance are going to have Mars-Saturn oppositions. Nonetheless, he was a commander. He was a relatively important person. By the way, the Russians showed his passport, and so you could tell when he was born. So I believe it said Travia. I think Travia or something like that is Ukrainian for May. So I think you could tell May the 15th, 1989. So there is his Mars-Saturn opposition. Mars in Cancer, Saturn in Capricorn. Mars in Cancer. Mars is how you express yourself, how you assert yourself. And now there are a number of ways in which you can assert yourself. Now, Prince Harry, for example, no, he hasn't got Mars in Cancer. No, sorry, what was I thinking? So here's Mars in Cancer. So Mars in Cancer is what you assert, is how you assert yourself. And Cancer can be about the nation. It's quite a patriotic sign. So Mars in Cancer for a nationalist leader, that very much fits. Very much fits the energy he's putting into his cause. And then it's, opposition Saturn. You could say, well, he's dying for his cause. That you could interpret that as, and it's made all the more intense. Okay, I don't know his time of birth, but Sun and Mars are pretty close to 45-degree aspects. So the Sun and Mars, two male planets, two very assertive, aggressive planets. So that adds fuel to the fire. So that's one way in which Mars-Saturn might work. If he had any frustrations, people with Mars-Saturn oppositions often feel frustrated. They don't know what to do with their energy. And I suppose putting your energy into supporting your cause, doing stuff for your nationalist cause, going to the extent of actually fighting, commanding troops, and then in the end dying for your cause, that would kind of fit Mars-Saturn. So let's have a different Mars-Saturn. And why not? Piers Morgan. Now, Piers Morgan is very much alive. I'm sure everyone's heard of him, but he's like major British journalist. He's probably, I don't know, is he the most successful current British journalist? A lot of people don't like him. He seems to be the kind of person that likes to pick fights. He has a particular aversion to Meghan and Harry. He just doesn't stop about Meghan. And you can see that he has got, there's his Mars at 11:25 Virgo. There is his Saturn at 11:24 Pisces. Now, okay, it's exact to 1 minute, but that's because I've taken his birth time as noon, but I don't know his birth time, so it's not necessarily as exact as that. So how would that work for him? So he is putting all that energy, that sort of frustrated energy that he may feel, into journalism, and that would be Mars in Virgo. There is a Virgo aspect to journalism. Going into the details, picking out, I suppose picking out all the dirt on people. That is incredibly Virgoan, looking for the dirt. Indeed, Mars Virgo opposition Saturn in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces is people's frailties, the stuck emotions that cause people to do weird things. So I think that fits really well, and this is all the more powerful because he's got an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction opposition Saturn. He's able to really be quite explosive about it, and he is. If you look at him on, on TV, he can't keep out of the spotlight. He is very aggressive, and he clearly has a great belief that he's right. I mean, he's a far person. Sun in Aries, Venus in Aries, Mercury in Aries, doesn't have any air in his chart. So people with all that fire no air. Yeah, he has a complete, not belief, sorry, not a belief that he's right. He knows he's right, no doubt about that. So that's Piers Morgan's chart. Piers Morgan's chart. Piers Morgan's chart. So another person with Mars-Saturn opposite. But in fact, I want to look at someone with a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now, this is a person you may not have heard of, but I find him quite fascinating. His noon chart. He's Jesse Livermore. Jesse Livermore was, one of the most successful investors of the 20th century. He just knew how to make money on the stock market. He was even when but the thing is, in the way he structured his life is the way his life was structured. What happened is he made a lot of money. He went maybe bankrupt. He'd lose it all, make it, lose it, and he just had this. He had this cycle through his whole life of doing this, and I think there was a book about him which was I think it's something like Memories of a Stock Operator or something. You can look it up. It's really good. I read it, so I would recommend it. And you can see that he's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. So how does that relate to Mars-Saturn, to having a Mars-Saturn conjunction? How does that work? Well, I'm wondering how was someone able to take the kind of risks he took, and because his style seemed to be that once he got his money back, he would just leverage his money. He'd just pour more and more of his money into a winning trade, and it could start off as quite a modest trade, and it would just, in the end, or in his case, very quickly, he'd make an absolute fortune, and he'd build his money up, and then bang, he'd lose it all. When the Wall Street crash in 29, everyone lost their money, not him. That day he made a fortune during the Wall Street crash, but then he lost his money a bit later. But I'm wondering that maybe his secret was almost that he knew that perhaps the worst that could happen, if you could have a bad trade or whatever, worst that can happen is it goes so bad you have to kill yourself. Maybe that's what he was thinking, because he did kill himself in the end. He shot himself in 1940. In the end, his trades went. He had to keep going. He couldn't just stop, enjoy his money, and so in the end, he shot himself. And here is the chart for his suicide. Remember, he's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in his chart, quite a close Mars-Saturn conjunction. And here's his suicide chart. So there you can see that Mars is at 5 Scorpio and Saturn is at 9 Taurus. So Mars-Saturn opposition. He was born on a Mars-Saturn conjunction, and he shot himself on a Mars-Saturn opposition. So that's Jesse Livermore. Who else? Well, someone else who's been in the news recently is, in terms of Bud Light, is Dylan Mulvaney. So the sort of transgender celebrity who was advertising or whatever, doing promotion thing regarding Bud Light, which completely backfired. So here is Dylan Mulvaney's chart. So you can see that there's a Mars-Saturn opposition here. Now, it's not so easy to spot because it's a dissociate opposition. Because if you'd expect Saturn to be in Aries, so you'd expect Mars to be in Libra, but it's not. It's in Virgo. But nonetheless, there is a Mars-Saturn opposition there. Now, I don't know very much about Dylan Mulvaney. And I I'm wondering maybe Mars-Saturn opposition, did that facilitate the wrecking of Bud Light? Certainly Mars-Saturn opposition, putting a lot of energy into something. There's some frustration there, putting energy into something, huge amounts of energy, because once Mars-Saturn starts putting its energy into something, it really can be very powerful. It can be very disciplined. I think she has, a major YouTube presence. Is that right? You tell me. And so probably that Mars-Saturn kind of helps. And the detail, I mean, she puts a lot of detail, I think, into the way she looks. Maybe that's Mars in Virgo. But it could also be the fact that Venus is on the midheaven. I mean, Venus on the midheaven is kind of fortunate. So if you have a man who has transitioned into being a woman, of course there's going to be criticism in some quarters. They're going to be told that it's maybe all in their head, that they're just being influenced by trends and whatever. But in this case, Venus is on the midheaven. There is a very prominent Venus there. And so that would perhaps justify maybe, well, no, it wouldn't. I mean, just Venus on the midheaven on its own does not mean that it's not a sign of being transgender, but it's just a sign that the feminine is going to be potentially very important for this person. But anyway, I'm digressing from a Mars-Saturn. I just thought it was interesting to note that Dylan Mulvaney does have a Mars-Saturn opposition. One more chart just to finish on the Mars-Saturn theme, or actually two more charts. It's kind of, I'm beginning to start to deviate here. Adolf Hitler, remember Mars-Saturn, death, destruction? Yes, he had a Mars-Saturn square. There's his Mars in Taurus, a Saturn in Leo, and his wife Eva Braun, her Saturn she had Saturn exactly in Taurus. So Eva Braun's Saturn was actually hitting his Mars, her husband Hitler's Mars. So let me just put that in a bi-wheel to explain that. So I'm going to put Eva Braun in the middle, Hitler on the outside. So there you can see Hitler's Mars, Saturn square, and so Eva Braun's Saturn was exactly square Hitler's Saturn and was on his Mars. That was also on his Venus-Mars conjunction. When you have Saturn, a hard Saturn aspect in synastry, when you're comparing two charts, it can often represent a generational clash. Obviously, Eva Braun was much younger than Hitler. I mean, she was born in 1912. He was born in 1889, so 22 years, something like that. But there was the clash. I don't know how that was experienced. I think that she was a young woman. Her particular generation, born in 1912, was clashing with him, who was born in 1889. But anyway, she still married him, and they died together, which is kind of quite fitting in a way for that Mars-Saturn connection. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today on the subject of Mars-Saturn. As you can tell, I find Mars-Saturn really interesting. It's kind of my favorite aspect. It just shows how sick I am. Anyway, I hope you find it interesting. And I will talk to you tomorrow.